Unbelievable. Caroline Levit takes down judge and billionaire in corruption case. Caroline Levit's heels echo through the marble hallways of the Manhattan Federal Courthouse. Her steps are firm, her hands clutching a folder filled with documents. The high ceiling and imposing columns seem overwhelming, as if the very building itself wants to remind everyone who truly holds power here. Some judges uphold the law. Others own it. The courtroom doors swing open, revealing Judge Harold Carmichael seated behind the imposing dark wooden bench. His gaze sweeps the room with the arrogance of a man who believes himself untouchable. The gavel rests beside him like a silent weapon. Across the room, Robert Shaw smirks as he adjusts his tie, while Trent Caldwell, a billionaire real estate mogul, inspects his gold cufflinks. The metallic sheen reflects his confidence in impunity. Caroline strides down the central aisle, keeping her eyes locked on the judge. There's something in the air. Something wrong. Carmichael raises an eyebrow and, with a tone dripping with irony, fires off. "Miss Levit, are we wasting the court's time again?" Muted chuckles ripple through the room. Shaw leans slightly toward Caroline, his voice soft but laced with venom. "You're out of your depth, sweetheart." She doesn't react. Instead, she calmly opens the folder, spreading out documents, transactions, and meticulously mapped connections. Her eyes return to Carmichael. The judge maintains his composure, but a faint twitch in his jaw betrays him. In the courthouse corridors, FBI agents move discreetly, determined. Caroline adjusts the microphone in front of her, looks directly at Carmichael and says firmly, "Then let's stop wasting time." She rises and walks to the prosecution's bench. Her voice is clear, controlled. She holds up a document and places it on the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, the case against Trent Caldwell is simple: money laundering and election fraud. But what makes this trial unique are the connections." She pauses, scanning the jurors. Some are already leaning forward, intrigued. Across the room, Robert Shaw leans back in his chair, a smug smile on his lips. He glances at Caldwell, who crosses his arms, unfazed. Caroline continues. "Here we have a $5 million transfer from Caldwell Enterprises to a shell company registered in Delaware. Days later, that money funds political donations that, conveniently, result in Caldwell securing lucrative real estate contracts." She slides another document onto the table. The camera zooms in, bank statements, connections drawn in red ink. Carmichael clears his throat and leans forward, interrupting with a tone dripping in boredom and sarcasm. "Ms. Levit, we're here to present evidence, not conspiracy theories." More muffled laughter in the courtroom. Shaw smiles, adjusting his cuffs. "I'm presenting facts, Your Honor." Caroline holds her ground. The tension thickens. She realizes something she had already suspected. Carmichael isn't just skeptical, he's protecting Caldwell. Carmichael glances at the documents as if they were meaningless. "All of this seems speculative to me." Shaw's grin widens. Caldwell leans in, whispering something to his attorney. Caroline takes a deep breath. She knows this battle will be brutal, and that Carmichael will do everything in his power to bury her case. Caroline watches as Carmichael flips through the documents with feigned disinterest. The wooden gavel rests on the bench, but the real authority lies in his condescending stare. "Ms. Levit," he says, drumming his fingers on the wood, "does the prosecution usually bring something more substantial? Or are we just indulging in hypotheticals?" Shaw chuckles under his breath. The sound irritates Caroline more than she'd like to admit. "This is substantial, Your Honor," she retorts. "Caldwell Enterprises transferred millions into offshore accounts, which then financed illegal donations to candidates who facilitated fraudulent real estate deals." Shaw rises, straightens his jacket, and speaks as if performing for an audience. "The government loves to spin dramatic stories, but facts are stubborn things. My client is a respected businessman, a philanthropist." Caroline crosses her arms, waiting for the predictable turn. And an easy target for a prosecution desperate for headlines. A few people in the courtroom nod in agreement. Caroline feels the narrative slipping through her fingers. She needs to act fast. "I ask the judge to consider the relevance of what has been presented," Shaw says. "Nothing here directly links Mr. Caldwell to any crime." Carmichael tilts his head as if pondering the matter, but Caroline already knows the answer before he even opens his mouth. "Sustained," he says, pushing the documents aside. "The bank records are circumstantial, with no direct evidence of intent by the defendant." Caroline clenches her teeth. This isn't just about Caldwell. Carmichael is closing doors, raising barriers. And now she is certain, he isn't just protecting Caldwell. He's involved. Caroline keeps her posture, but inside, her blood is boiling. She knew Carmichael would try to smother the case, but watching him dismiss evidence so easily only confirms her suspicions. She takes a deep breath, then slides another document across the table. This time her voice is precise, cutting. If bank records are circumstantial, perhaps a direct transfer between Trent Caldwell and a shell company controlled by this very court will be more convincing. The room falls silent. Shaw, who was already preparing another arrogant rebuttal, furrows his brow. Caroline continues. This $500,000 transfer was traced to an offshore account linked to a company called HLC Holdings. A front company. The interesting detail? The owner of this account is. She pauses for a second, letting the moment sink in, then slides another paper onto the judge's bench. Harold L. Carmichael. The air in the courtroom turns heavy. Caldwell shifts uncomfortably in his chair. Shaw blinks rapidly, processing what he just heard. Carmichael keeps his composure, but his tone is now harsher, sharper. This is inadmissible, he says, his voice deep. It's an official bank transaction record, Your Honor, Caroline replies. Stricken from the record, Carmichael orders, slamming the gavel down hard. Caroline notices the glisten of sweat on the judge's forehead. Shaw swallows dryly. Caldwell presses his lips together. She knew she was right. Now everyone in the room knew it too. But it still wasn't enough. She needed the final proof. And luckily she already knew where to find it. The tension in the courtroom is palpable. The echo of Carmichael's gavel still lingers when Caroline leans forward slightly, keeping her eyes locked on the judge. He tries to regain his composure, but there's something different now, a tiny hesitation, almost imperceptible, but she catches it. She could stop here. She could step back and live to fight another day. But that's not who Caroline Levit is. With a calculated move, she reaches into the inner pocket of her blazer and places a small device on the table. A recorder. Your Honor, if bank documents are insufficient, perhaps a private conversation between Your Honor and the defendant would be more enlightening. Carmichael stiffens. Caldwell leans forward. Shaw is already rising, but Caroline presses a button, and the entire courtroom falls into absolute silence. The recording plays. Make sure this case disappears. Carmichael's voice fills the courtroom. I've dealt with prosecutors before. This trial is a formality. Caldwell is safe. Shaw's breathing quickens. Caldwell turns pale. Carmichael closes his eyes for a moment, but when he opens them, his fury is undeniable. This was obtained illegally. He shouts, his voice finally breaking from its calculated tone. A wiretap authorized by the FBI, Your Honor, Caroline replies. Recorded 3 days ago. A murmur spreads through the courtroom. Some people stand to get a better view. At the door, men in dark suits appear silently. Carmichael realizes. He understands what is about to happen. Before he can react, a firm voice cuts through the air. Judge Harold Carmichael, you are under arrest. The courtroom erupts into chaos. Reporters pull out their phones. The judge's gavel falls to the floor with a dull thud. And for the first time that day, Caroline allows herself a small smile. The courtroom descends into disorder. Murmurs turn into raised voices, journalists' cameras flash, illuminating the scene. Carmichael remains still for a moment, his eyes fixed on Caroline, as if still trying to comprehend what just happened. But reality catches up quickly. 2 FBI agents step forward. The taller one, Agent Daniel Reyes, holds up a warrant. Judge Harold Carmichael, you are under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Please stand up. Carmichael doesn't move. His fingers grip the arms of his chair, knuckles white with tension. This is ridiculous, he mutters. The agent beside Reyes pulls out handcuffs. At that moment, Caldwell leans toward Shaw, his voice a panicked whisper. Get me a deal. No. Shaw doesn't respond immediately. His gaze is still locked on the scene in front of him, as if his own world is crumbling alongside Carmichael's. Your Honor. Reyes insists, his tone firmer now. Defeated, Carmichael exhales a long sigh. He stands slowly, adjusts his robe and stares at Caroline. His eyes no longer hold arrogance, only something darker, a silent threat. You have no idea what you've just done, he whispers. Caroline doesn't look away. Oh, I think I do. The cuffs click shut around the judge's wrists. He is led away as reporters rush forward, microphones in hand. The courtroom still buzzes, the weight of the moment heavy on everyone's faces. Caldwell, sweating, tugs at his tie as if the knot is choking him. Shaw finally moves. He leans toward Caroline, his voice now devoid of arrogance. How much time do we have to negotiate? Caroline takes a deep breath and slides the documents back into her folder. As much time as the FBI allows. The courtroom is still in turmoil as Carmichael disappears down the corridors, surrounded by FBI agents. The sound of cameras, the nervous murmurs, everything blends with the distant echo of firm footsteps leading him away. At the defense table, Trent Caldwell wipes his forehead with a handkerchief, his hand trembling slightly. He knows what's coming next. Shaw, he murmurs, his eyes never leaving Caroline. I'm not going down with him. Shaw takes a deep breath, trying to regain control of the situation. He adjusts his tie, straightens his shoulders and stands up. Your Honor, he says, his voice steadier than he feels. The defense requests a recess to reconsider our client's strategy. Caroline crosses her arms, analyzing Shaw. He's cornered and she knows exactly what that means. The government is willing to hear an offer, she says, sliding a business card onto the defense table. Caldwell stares at it, then looks at Shaw. He has no choice. Get me out of this, he orders in a tense whisper. Caroline watches the scene. They're desperate. She's won. But the feeling isn't exactly relief. After all, Carmichael may have fallen, but Caldwell still has resources, allies, doors to knock on. This game is far from over. The interim judge bangs the gavel. Granted. Court is in recess. Caroline gathers her documents and takes a deep breath before turning to leave. Outside, reporters are already waiting and the questions will be relentless. But none of that matters. Because the truth won today. At least for now. Caroline leaves the courtroom with her head held high, but the adrenaline still courses through her veins. The weight of the day begins to settle in, and she allows herself a momentary pause as she walks down the corridor, away from the eager eyes of the reporters. She pulls her phone from her pocket, but before checking messages or missed calls, the screen lights up with a notification, an encrypted message. She recognizes the sender without needing to read it. With quick fingers, Caroline unlocks the file. The reading is swift, but her heart pounds as the words take shape. Carmichael was just a pawn. The real players are still out of reach. Be careful. She takes a deep breath, the message echoing in her mind. It's not just a warning, it's a threat. And yet another confirmation that this case and everything it represents is just the tip of the iceberg. The courtroom door opens behind her. An FBI agent, the same one who was present at Carmichael's arrest, approaches with a grave expression. Everything okay? He asks, though his voice betrays concern. Caroline gives a brief smile. Not yet, but I'm getting there. She pockets her phone and heads for the exit. The power games continue, and while one enemy has fallen, Caroline knows the real challenge is only beginning. Caroline's footsteps echo down the corridor, each movement more determined than the last. She's already leaving the courthouse, but something in her mind keeps spinning. The feeling of victory is there, but with it, the awareness that this battle was just a chapter in a much larger story. She steps onto the sidewalk, where a crowd of journalists awaits, cameras and microphones ready to capture her every word. The pressure is on, but Caroline remains calm as always. Her gaze sweeps past the reporters, focusing on the horizon before she stops and turns to the camera. Judge Carmichael was arrested today for corruption and obstruction of justice. This is a significant step, but know this, the fight is far from over. What we've learned here is clear, the justice system will not bow to power. What happened today is just the beginning. She pauses, staring into the camera with the intensity her adversaries know all too well. The law does not protect the powerful. It exposes them. The camera zooms in on Caroline's face, capturing the conviction shining in her eyes. But before she can say more, a new sound cuts through the silence. Her phone vibrates again in her pocket. She glances at the screen, her fingers hesitating for just a second before opening the message. The screen glows with another encrypted notification from the same sender. This isn't over. They're watching. And they won't stop. Caroline feels a chill run down her spine but quickly pushes it aside. She turns to the camera once more. The game is just beginning. She shifts her gaze and walks down the street, her steps firm, ready to face whatever comes next. And so, the stage is set for the next act. But the real question remains, who is truly in control? Who is pulling the strings from the shadows? Justice, as we've seen, moves at its own pace, but it's not always fair. Sometimes, it needs someone to push it in the right direction. Caroline Levit made a difference today, but the road ahead is filled with mysteries yet to be unraveled. Now, I know what you're thinking. You want more. More about what's behind this battle. More about what's coming next. So, if you don't want to miss the next chapter of this story, subscribe now. Because, my friend, the journey is far from over. And if you like seeing justice served, hit that like button. After all, nothing says "I want more" like a simple thumbs up, right? Get ready, because what we've seen so far is just the surface. And the next twist? Well, you won't want to miss it. So subscribe, like, and share so everyone can follow this tale of corruption, power, and, of course, an unrelenting fight for the truth. What's coming next? You'll only know if you stay with us.